Hello, Comics Alternative fans. Before we start with the episode, we want to invite all of you to check out our Patreon campaign.
That's right. Go to www.patreon.com/comicsalternative for more details. There you'll find more information about the campaign and the cool rewards levels we have.
For as little as $1 a month, you can help us maintain good quality comics talk, and the more you contribute, the more perks you get.
These include monthly podcast episodes exclusive to Patreon supporters, as well as the chance to help us choose which books we review on the show. So be sure to visit www.patreon.com/comicsalternative and become one of our proud podcast patrons.
Yeah, and now on with the show.
This is the Comics Alternative Interviews. Another conversation with Craig Yoe. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Comics Alternative Interviews. I'm Derek.
And I'm Gene, and we're two guys with PhDs talking about comics.
And on this, our very first episode for 2016, we have the pleasure of talking with friend of the podcast, Craig Yoe. But before we get to that conversation, we want to let all of you guys know that this episode of the Comics Alternative Interviews is brought to you by the great folks at Discount Comic Book Service. Go to their website, dcbservice.com, for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. There, you're going to find all DC, Marvel, Image, and Dark Horse titles at 40% off of the cover price if you pre-order. For all of the other publishers, you'll find that those discounts are 20 to 35% off of the cover price, and every single month you're going to find some unbelievable specials. Sometimes those specials will be at 45% off cover price, sometimes at 50% off, but often you're going to find discounts that go higher than that.
Yeah, we call it bundle madness here at the Comics Alternative. And if you go to Discount Comic Book Service, you'll find bundles usually from Marvel, DC, Valiant. Sometimes there are first issue special bundles, or even sometimes some clearance bundles that can go, again, like you said, for really crazy discounts.
That's right. Now, they have not, as of this recording, put up their January catalog yet, what specials they'll have in January, but you can count on great discounts. So why don't you start off the new year saving money by going to Discount Comic Book Service. Their website is dcbservice.com. Go there for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. And after you do get your comics there, be sure to send them an email and tell them that the two guys with PhDs sent you. And Gene, since you've last been on the show, we have another sponsor for the Comics Alternative.
More sponsorship.
That's right. And this one is Just Coffee Co-op. It's a great place to get coffee, tea, and chocolates. All of their coffee is 100% fair trade, shade-grown, and organic certified. The coffee is roasted to order, and they do so in small batches, not mass-produced.
So to take advantage of this deal, you can go to justcoffee.coop. That's justcoffee.coop. And if you enter the coupon code COMICS as you check out, you get 10% off your order. Plus, your shipping is actually free. So you can have a nice cup. You can have a nice cuppa while you're reading your newest comics.
Exactly, and it is great coffee. We can attest to that. So go to justcoffee.coop. Use our coupon code COMICS, and you'll be sitting pretty this holiday season. Gene, we had a wonderful conversation with Craig Yoe, but I think that could go without saying. Every time we have him on the show, it's always fun.
Yeah, Craig and Cleetia are both great people, and we get to find out a lot more about kind of how, the nuts and bolts of how some of these books are put together, and we also get some previews of what's coming next year, or I should say this year.
Exactly. And in fact, you mentioned Cleetia. We even hear her one or two times in the background.
Yeah, maybe next time we can have a little more than just a background appearance from her.
And get her on the show, because she's just as much a part of Yoe Books as Craig is.
That's for sure.
Yeah, so we have a great conversation for this new year, and we call it a new Yoe. So let's listen to what the conversation was like.
We love all the stuff from your books, and we look for the upcoming titles. They don't cost a whole lot of dough. That's why we say yippee-yi-yo. You too can buy all of your books. Be a fan, and there's one way to show.
We're very pleased to have as a guest once again on the Comics Alternative the great Craig Yoe. Craig, welcome back to the Comics Alternative.
Well, I'm pleased. I'm pleased as punch. Thank you for the welcome and having me back. It's always fun.
Yeah, good to talk to you again.
Craig, we didn't plan it this way at the very beginning of 2015, but the first podcast episode that we put up in 2015 was our interview with you. And I think at one point, and it may have been toward the end of the interview, you said, "Happy New Yoe." And then we thought, what better way to begin every year on the Comics Alternative than having Craig Yoe on as not just the first guest, but up as the very first episode of the new year. So this is our first episode of 2016. You're on. So everyone, Happy New Yoe.
Oh, that's just great. Like funny hats and champagne and interviews with Craig Yoe.
Yeah, we both Derek and I are wearing forelocks right now in your honor.
Oh, that's great.
Well, Craig, speaking of funny hats and whatnot, this time last year, we were talking with you about the very beginning of the 5-year anniversary of Yoe Books. And so here we are a year later, and maybe we can start off our discussion by you telling us, how did that go?
Well, it's fun to earmark, little milestones. And so our 5th year, we did that, and we put together a whole YYYS, the Yippee-Yi-Yo Society, which is kind of an ode to Mary Marvel Marching Society. And so we wrote songs and had pledges and stickers like the whole Mary Marvel Marching Society kit in the old days that Stan and friends put together. And so we kind of celebrated in that way, and we had a grand time. And we worked hard to bring out some good books so that it would attempt to prove that we weren't just resting on our laurels. And so it's been a great year. Looking back, I'm nothing but happy about how everything transpired.
Now, are those buttons and stickers and whatnot still available, or are people still getting them, or are those rare commodities that
they're rare commodities? But I should see if I actually ended up only getting a couple, because it ended up IDW was handling the promotion and gave almost all of them away before they had thought this. We realized that none had been sent to me. So I got a couple. I'll reach into my drawers if you want and see if I have one of the YYIS kits for you, because you guys are definitely should be part of the clan.
Well, I have my paraphernalia sitting right here beside me.
Oh, you got it?
Yeah.
Set. Oh, good. I thought you were on the list.
You lucky dog.
Yeah. So, yeah, well, they're rare. I guess I'll see you on eBay tonight, and Gene can bid for your kit.
Okay, there's an idea. Yeah,
that's cool.
Well,
for you.
Yeah. Well, Craig, you were talking about the productive year 2015 was, and that's one of the things that we want to talk with you about today. Is it's almost like an explosion of publication of Yoe Books in the last 2 or 3 months of the year. Now, Gene and I both talked about the 3rd volume of Haunted Horror on our Halloween episode, and in fact, that took up most of our discussion on that episode, and rightly so.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, but since then, there have been, and correct me if I'm wrong, 4 books. There is Walt Kelly's Fairy Tales, and then we have the 1st volume of Complete Voodoo, Ghosts and Girls of Horror House, and then Horror by Heck.
Yeah, and I think you're forgetting the second volume of Weird Love.
Weird Love. Now, I know that was out, but did that come out since Halloween? Or was that earlier?
Oh gosh, now I thought it was.
I think the second volume was since.
Okay. See, this tells us something about the prolific nature of Yoe Books, is that, we can't remember how many have come out recently. We can't recall. There are just so many.
It's interesting. People always ask me, like, so what book's out next? Or when is this scheduled to hit the stores? Or when can I order this volume? And I never know, because Cleese and I really just focus on getting, what's at hand and getting the books out that we're working on right now, and we really know what the schedule is of when things are going to be seen and all that kind of stuff. We're almost in the dark as much as anyone. Like right now, you mentioned Don Heck, Horror by Heck, and I think it hit the comic shops yesterday, but I wouldn't be sure. And sadly, there's no comic shop near me to go check. So
I didn't make it to my local shop yesterday, unfortunately. Otherwise, I could have let you know, because they're generally pretty good about stocking all the Yoe books there.
Ah, good for them. God bless them.
Now, you mentioned Clitzia. Now, we should mention that that you guys are a team. That the books that you guys put out, both of you are right on top of it.
Oh yeah. I mean, she does most of the work, and I take most of the credit. But yeah, we're definitely a team. We team up in a few things. We've teamed up and had a couple kids, and we've teamed up and had many books, more books than kids.
Additions and
I
additions.
So.
Yeah. I met someone at San Diego Comic-Con last year, and they were asking me what I did. I said, well, we kind of do all these books, and we have kids. And she goes, oh, so I get it. You're into reproduction. So we're into printing books and fathering and mothering kids. So
replicating DNA.
Yep.
I noticed that in the like title pages of most of these books, Clitzia is normally listed as it's produced by Clitzia Gosoni. What exactly does that mean? Because that's a huge job.
And she does so much, and I think we just copped that term from the movies or something. And when I was at the Muppets, I worked with a couple producers, and before I was at the Muppets, I never knew what a producer was, but I found out a producer is just somebody that works their tail off and puts everything together and really makes it happen, and make sure everything's in the right place at the right time, and people are all working together. And a producer is an amazing person. It really takes amazing people to fill that role, whether it's in a movie or a producer of a book. And Khaleesi is amazing, and so we thought that was a good way to describe her. But she does a lot of different things. She helps design the book. She does all the restoration of all the classic material, and she helps edit my copy to make me look good instead of my 8th grade English teacher fainting. And English is her second language, yet she's much better at it than me. So so she's really. We did the term producer confuse you, or did it enlighten you when you read that in the books, Gene?
Well, I've never seen a book listed that way, quite that way before. I mean, I know that you guys are a team, and I know how much work that you all put into everything, but I just haven't seen that term used in a book before. And I wasn't sure if that was kind of like a production manager thing, or like traffic manager, or does production mean like design, or is it it's kind of all those things? It sounds like.
I mean, not that there's anything wrong with those roles, but she's not just like a production manager or like that. I mean, she's a producer, like a producer of a movie. It's a term of honor. I hope people didn't think that was anything but the highest of praise. And
oh no, I didn't think it was pejorative at all. I just wasn't sure what all that entailed, because again, like I said, I know that that you guys both do so much together.
Yeah. No,
And these books are clearly made with love. There's so much attention to detail all the way through them.
well, that's the same way we make the kids, with love.
Are they made with weird love?
They're made with weird love. It's a love making kind of. It's a result of love making. So both the kids and the book. So yeah, no, we do. Gosh darn it, we love comics and we love cartoonists and we love design, and I don't love writing. Someone once said that they hate writing. They love having written. So
yeah.
That's that's pretty much how I feel about that. It's fun to. And in some ways, I like writing because it creates this words and this gray matter, which is a kind of a cool design element to put against, all the colorful pictures from comics and things like that. I don't know how many people read introductions anyway. I've been told, and I'm trying to think about this too much, or it would just continue to give me writer's block. But I was told that maybe only 1 in every 20 people actually read a book's introduction, and I imagine most people skip right to the comics and right over those marching ants, as Edgar Rice Burroughs called the words on a page.
I'm that one of the 20 then, though.
Oh,
I always read that stuff.
Oh yeah, I read the intros before I get to the comics.
well, you guys are PhDs, you're intellectuals, you're smarty pants who know how to read and all that kind of stuff. So I'm not surprised you're in the minority, but. Which is not to say our readers are, dumb or something like that. But I just think, you guys are more into that side of it. And so I'm glad you're reading it. And I'm glad it doesn't look too bad as a result of Kletia copy editing my work. And the other, we have a small army of dedicated proofreaders who save our asses time and time again.
Now, you were talking about the work that you and Kletia do on the design of your books, and maybe let's start there with one of your recent titles. Now, I mean, all of your books, as we said on, I think countless times on the Comics Alternative, all of your books are designed very well. Of the recent ones, though, I think most of them, since they're part of the Chilling Archive series, they have to have a certain look, a consistent size and whatnot. And that's one of the reasons why Walt Kelly's Fairy Tales really stands out, because you guys could do, anything you wanted to with that. And I have to say, when I got this book, the other month, I was astounded. And in fact, I even emailed Gene almost as soon as I got that. I said, "Oh my God, have you gotten your copy yet? Because this is beautiful."
Oh, thank you. Well, we did try to pull out all stops. We wanted to look like an old Victorian, by order of the Queen or something, a special storybook for young people. And, so we have, the sides of it are gold leaf like an old Bible. And, there's gold foil printing on top and a tipped-in plate, and we have these raised bars on the spine, and a red ribbon to mark your place, and so we really tried to make the deluxe present you would get from your grandparent, the kind of a book heirloom that you might have the rest of your life and pass down to your kids and stuff, and I think. The Walt Kelly material was worthy of that, and the fairy tale subject, so it kind of all tied in. So yeah, we really, we in our printer, we knocked ourselves out to try to pull off something really special.
Yeah, you just kind of mentioned all the things that I wanted to say about the book, just design wise, because it really is just a beautiful, beautiful object. Like all the gold leaf and stuff like that. Even like the very fancy Yoe and IDW on the spine, which you almost don't even notice.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. They're kind of decorative. We kind of put those in at the last second because we go, because we had our normal IDW and Yoe logos, and they really look kind of crass next to all the Victorian and gold and everything. So we kind of took a different approach on that one, and I'm glad. Thanks for noticing. It was a lot of fun to put that together, and it's a big, thick book. So, I'm hoping it's accomplishing, what we set out to do, but to make it special. And again, Kelly, I mean, he was doing comics that were really special in that he was doing kind of decorative devices and borders and beautiful covers with all this intricate artwork, that looked like some kind of old tapestry or something like that. So I mean, if we would have put all this kind of frou on a book about Little Lulu or something, as much as I love Little Lulu, it wouldn't have been the right matchup. But I think it worked with the Walt Kelly's fairy tales.
Yeah, and just the design element just goes all the way through. Even like the introductory stuff, you even got you reproduce some of the little decorative bars and stuff that he's got around the comics. You put those in the introduction as well, so it really feels like just a complete package that way.
No, thanks a lot, man. I'm glad you like my package.
And the comics are good too.
Oh, yeah. I mean, sometimes I see some books. I mean, that the design seems to overwhelm the material, and I don't think that's ever good. I want the material to be the hero, to the design to. Sometimes I actually think I'm kind of conservative in my design because I want the comics themselves to be the thing that stands out and not you're shouting so much with your design chops that you're taking away from the actual content. But I think this works, and at least I hope so. So that's what we attempted to do.
Where did the idea for this Walt Kelly volume come from? I mean, is this something you've been wanting to do for a long time? Did you want to?
Actually, I think this was you talked about it was our 5th anniversary, and here we are 6 years later. But I think that maybe one of the first two. It was one of the first 2 or 3 books we wanted to do. So 6 years ago we were thinking about it. And we actually started putting it together back then. And then we had a couple starts and stops and distractions, through those years. And we actually kind of put it on the back shelf for long periods of time. And then all of a sudden, IDW and I started talking about, hey, let's finish up that Walt Kelly's Fairy Tales book. And so we finally did. And we worked with Walt Kelly's stepson a little bit to get his blessing on the project, and different collectors. I had by that time I had assembled most of the old comics that we needed to reproduce from, but there were still a couple holes in my collection. So collectors came forward, and so finally it all came together. And actually, I kind of, as you can imagine, there was a long process of working with the printer to try to make all the special effects really work and be affordable and work together. And we had much more TLC looking at press proofs and things like this than maybe the normal book would have.
Yeah, I had a couple of friends visit a few days ago, and one of them works in publishing, and she looked at this book, and they both thought it was beautiful, but her first thought was, "Oh my God, what a design nightmare! What a production nightmare!" Just because of so much detail all over the book.
Yeah, well, now you see why Cleach's title of producer deserves a lot of credit. Yeah, no, it was a lot, and I'm not even going to say why. We actually one of the things didn't work out quite to my satisfaction. I'm not even going to tell you which part, but that's the way with every book. It sounds like you're enjoying it. I look at books that come out, and normally I cringe with sadness or embarrassment or horror. And not because sometimes we produce pre-code horror comics, but I just look at a horror like, oh my gosh, we didn't do that quite right, or I would make that design element a little bigger, or I shouldn't have had that design element on there at all, or I wish this would have worked out or whatever, you know. So I'm glad other people enjoy my books. They're not always enjoyable to me. They're actually painful to look at many times. So, I look at Walt Kelly's fairy tales with pain. You look at it with pleasure. But there's a fine line between pain and pleasure.
You suffer so we can have enjoyment.
That's right.
Yeah, there we go.
Before this book, I really wasn't familiar with Walt Kelly's fairy tale work. And so, I came to this very new, and I think that's part of where the the enthusiastic appreciation comes from. And in reading through this book, it just struck. I mean, I couldn't help but think of the old Classics Illustrated, and before that, Classic Comics. As much as I enjoy at times, definitely appreciate Classics Illustrated, I have to say that Kelly's take on fairy tales, because there were a lot of fairy tales that were adapted in Classics Illustrated, that Kelly's just stand head and shoulders above Classics Illustrated stuff. And the thing is that Fairy Tale Parade came out not too soon after Classic Comics started in 1941, I believe it was. So, I mean, it's just amazing how, when we think of classic comics and the adaptation of, let's say, literature, fairy tales, folk tales, or what have you, people immediately think of Classics Illustrated. But it's Walt Kelly's work, though, that really is impressive here.
When I think of Classics Illustrated, I'm sorry, because it sounds like you're a fan, but I think the full name should be Classics Badly Illustrated. And I think part of this was an economic thing, in that I'm told through hearsay that they paid really god-awful rates for Classics Illustrated. So they didn't really respect the artists, and even some great artists who did work for Classics Illustrated, Lou Cameron or Reed Crandall or Al Williamson, or different artists. They didn't always do their best work. I do. There are a couple out of the many titles that they published. There are a couple standouts that look pretty great, but by and large, even when they had good artists, they didn't seem to be doing their best work because of probably the low page rates. Conversely, with Walt Kelly, I think he was pretty well paid compared to most industry rates, and they really highly regarded Kelly. I mean, he's even in the introductory editorial, which was probably by Oscar Lebeck, the editor. He even talks about Walt Kelly, and it seemed like it was Walt Kelly's book, and maybe it was even his ideas. I don't know if it was Oscar's or Walt's idea, but they must have somehow conceived this together. And I think the editor had the utmost regard for Walt Kelly, and so I think that comes out on the pages. I mean, Kelly was highly regarded, and he was doing his best work, and he had just come from his fairy tale background of working at Walt Disney. I don't mean fairy tale as far as the politics, because that's one of the reasons he left, of the strike. But I meant to work on all the fairy tale movies, Snow White and Pinocchio, and I think it was the perfect coming together at the right time. A publisher who valued his work, his familiarity and love of fairy tales and fairy tale artwork. I mean, he was obviously influenced by, like, the fairy tale artist Arthur Rackham and other illustrators like Franklin Booth, who had that majestic and magical approach to their work. So. I think it was just a great venue for him to do classics beautifully illustrated, which resulted in the fairy tales illustrated by Walt Kelly.
Yeah, I think his animation background really shines through too, because the drawings have so much life in them.
Yeah, the poses and the figures and the body language and the fun and the humor of it. I mean. As we know, fairy tales can be kind of dark and even violent, and these stories don't totally shy away from that. There's some actually pretty gruesome moments, like classical fairy tales. But also there's a lot of lighthearted romp about it, and vein and, humor and, like you say, animation. It looks animated. It looks like an animated storyboard in some ways.
Yeah, exactly. That's one of the things that struck me is that Kelly did not shy away from representing, or I guess translating into comics form, some of those dark and frightening aspects of classic fairy tales. For instance, the story of Hansel and Gretel is one example. And even though his art may have that animated look, I mean, one could even call it cartoony, but in a good way, right? Not a negative way. There's that strange juxtaposition of the cartoony / animation style art, which seems to draw you in to something that's friendly, warm, welcoming, and fun, and then the dark message that's woven throughout the fairy tale. And I really did appreciate that mix of the two.
Yep. Very astute.
Fairy tales they're a dark ride, man.
Oh yeah. Well, there's some gruesome moments in some of these fairy tales, and we actually kind of, we're always, compiling collections of horror comics, so where it's not like we're, not exposed to this kind of stuff, but there were some actually pretty horrific moments in some of Walt Kelly's comics there that made us pause, because certainly this is, if any book deserved the title All Ages, this is it, so I think adults can enjoy it and kids can enjoy it, but I think we got very positive review on best of list of the New York Times, and they talked about, this is a great book to, curl up on a comfy chair with your kid and read it to them, and we have young kids and that we curl up and read comics to, but I would actually think and say to my son, "Oh well, let's skip this story and hop to the next one for tonight," or something like that. Because there's a couple pretty strong stories in there, where I'm not sure that tender young minds are quite ready for yet. On the other hand, I'm guarding my kid, and meanwhile he's playing violent video games and stuff like that. So, what can I say?
One of my favorite stories in this collection is Rip Van Winkle. Now, first off, let me say that I'm a sucker for almost any adaptation of 18th and 19th century American literature. I mean, I have a particular fondness for those comics. And what I really appreciate about Rip Van Winkle is how Kelly did not sugarcoat the story, that he didn't try to, let's say, Disneyfy it. Because to me, the original Rip Van Winkle is a frightening short story, especially when it comes to the little men that Rip meets in the Catskills. And I think it would be all too easy for a comics adapter to make those little men cute in a way that Disney loves to do. Make them something like the Ewoks, let's say, in the third Star Wars movie. But no, the fact that he makes them remain silent, and even though they do have kind of a cartoony look to them, there's something scary and spooky about these creatures in the Catskills. And I think that that's what Irving wanted. I mean, that's what he was trying to get across. And the very last panel, which consumes over half of that page, is of these silent, creepy-looking small creatures bowling. And so it ends on that somber note.
Yeah.
And he also includes the political aspect of it, too. We see, before he goes to, quote-unquote, sleep, the image of King George outside of that tavern. And then when he wakes up, it's George Washington that's on the sign, which I think most adapters would tend to overlook that political fact. But because Rip Van Winkle originally was quite a political story.
Well, that's interesting that you saw that, because as we know, Walt Kelly was the first one to famously have a political bent to his comic strips in the Pogo comics. So it's interesting that he preserved that political aspect in Rip Van Winkle. which was written right down the street from us. By the way, we're just a stone's throw from Washington Irving's home where we live and work. So you'll have to come up here and visit us, and we'll give you a tour of Washington Irving's home.
Oh, you Knickerbocker, you.
I hadn't even noticed the fact that the little men never actually speak. That is kind of freaky, because all the other almost all the other stories where there's little imps or fairies or trolls or whatever, like, or dwarves, they're always just talking and laughing and making jokes and stuff. And these guys never say a word. That is pretty freaky.
Yeah, it just makes it that much more creepy, doesn't it?
Another one of my favorites in this collection is the very last one, Goblin Glen. And the reason why I enjoyed this story so much is that the goblins remind me of what would later become the style of Pogo. Because there are certain goblin creatures here that do have the shape and rough look of Pogo.
Yeah, it's interesting because you sort of... apart from the enjoyment of the story and the artwork, the book also does serve to give us a picture of Kelly's development. I mean, he's left Disney, and he's kind of learning to draw comics and doing it his own way and with his own experimentation. But he's trying to also learn the comics form, which is similar to doing animation, but it is also a whole different thing. So he's learning to draw comics. He's learning to do them fast. I'm sure they had to work fast at Disney, but with comics, as highly regarded as he was, and probably paid better than the average, on comics, to make a living, you still have to, learn to work fast. So I think he was working fast, and the stories are pretty much chronological. So he's working fast in those beginning ones, and the work looks slightly rushed, but by the end of the book, his chops are really getting fine. He's still probably working fast, but he's learned to work really good and fast. And the Goblin story, I think, is close. He's about ready to you can see he's going to be able to jump into the Pogo comic strip soon, because the characters are getting really beautifully drawn, and the line work is really, really nice, and it is the most Pogo-esque part of the book, I think.
Yeah, the hat, the kind of hats that some of the characters wear, even like the panel borders themselves are looking very Pogo. The beginning of the book, he's kind of like you said, he's learning his way through comics form. There's some kind of layout ticks that you see in some of the earlier stories that don't show up by the later ones. He's kind of moved away from these kind of not quite clear layouts sometimes. So them just very, very clear, and just the line work is just so much more confident. The line work is beautiful at the beginning, but it looks like you said it looks rushed, but at the same time it looks like I can kind of see the work in some of it. By the last couple of stories, I don't even see work anymore. It just kind of looks like this is my line.
Yeah. No, yeah, it's a beautiful thing.
Now, you had mentioned that one of the things that took a little while with this book is that, I guess, you still needed to plug some holes in your own collection of the Walt Kelly fairy tales. Now, with both this volume and for others as well, are all the comics that we see in Yoe Books primarily, maybe not entirely, but primarily ones from your collection?
Well, when we started off, it was, 5 or 6 years ago, it was primarily the ones in my collection. Even our first Ditko book, I did call up some Ditko collectors to help us out on that. So it's always been, I guess, about roughly 50-50. 50% of them are from my collection, 50% are from other collector friends. And these friends have been, quite generous, but it's been nice because at the beginning people started seeing the books that we were doing, and they enjoyed them, so they were willing to open up their collections, because there's some collectors that they're very they hold their comics close to their chest, or their comics are in like super mint condition, and if you just look at them cross-eyed, they might corner might curl up and the value plummets $10,000 or something. So but through the years we found collectors who have nice great collections and who are generous and who trust us with their comics. Oftentimes they ship them to us and we hold on to them for a while, and we're carefully scanning them with white gloves and treating them with respect. But there's always a little a collector. Some of the collectors probably lost a little sleep at night, but they were willing to do that because they liked what we were doing to preserve comics and to propagate the good old artists and things like that. So I'd say roughly half. I mean, I've been collecting for over 50 years now, so I do have quite a few comics and pieces of artwork here and things like that I use for our books. But we couldn't do it without our collector friends too.
Well, shifting gears a bit from the fun world of fairy tales to the frightening and fun world of horror, I know that one of the things that you do in some of your Chilling Archive collections is that you turn over the curating, I guess you could say, to other people. And about a year and a half ago, with the Worst of Eerie Publications volume, you turned that over to Mike Howlett, whom we had on the show, and it was a really fun interview. Now, with the Ghost and Girls of Fiction House, this is another volume that you turned over to someone else, Michael H. Price.
Yep.
So was this his idea?
Yeah, he came to us with the idea. He has a big fondness for horror comics and in the Fiction House horror stories in particular, and he suggested it. It might have passed my mind because I have a few of those in my collection, and I think especially the great. What comes to mind is those great covers. That were on those comics, and I have to give him total credit. He came to it was his idea. He figured out which stories to use, and he helped us coordinate. Again, I didn't have very many of those comics in my collection, and he actually I don't think had a lot of them either. So we were able to coordinate with some people he knew, and then especially calling on some of my close friends to gather all the stories. But it was his idea, and he wrote a wonderful introduction. And I really, probably nothing more needed to be said, but I wanted to write a little forward because I have a fondness for Fiction House because I had discovered that when I was a impressionable young lad, and thought the way the artist delineated the women and everything was pretty special. So, I kind of wanted to have my toe in the book, and so I wrote a short kind of anecdotal forward. But
yeah, it's worth noting that your forward is titled 50 Shades of Four Colors, because as you point out, one of the things that was so alluring to you as a youth and as an adult, I mean, I can understand, is let me see how can we put this? This is a wonderful marriage between Headlight Comics and horror.
Right.
Yeah, and it's interesting because with each of these volumes of your Chilling Archive series, it's an education picking one of these up because you don't turn to, I guess we could say, the usual suspects of horror. These volumes are devoted either to, let's say, some legendary figures who did horror work, like the Heck volume, that doesn't get as much attention, or things like Fiction House, which most people don't really turn to when it comes to horror from the 40s and 50s. I know I really didn't know about Jumbo Comics, and so reading both your foreword and Price's intro was quite an education.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, people normally think of Fiction House as these buxom jungle girls, or these, or the Planet comics, which had space opera, and those were wonderful genre kind of things. But actually, horror comics, just didn't start in the 50s. Like is what people normally think of as for horror comics, that they got started with the EC Comics or something like that. I mean, EC wasn't the first one to publish comics devoted to horror. They were the first one to do it in such a robust and certainly wonderful way, but they weren't the first. And there was a string of horror throughout throughout comics. I mean, superheroes were often battling ghouls and zombies and, monsters of one sort or another that could be definitely classified as horror. So horror's always been part of comics. I mean, the early comics writers and artists, they needed things to draw on. So they drew on pulps, which had a lot of horror, and they also drew on the scary radio shows of the time. And, there was even horror hosts that introduced the stories years before the three horror hosts of EC Comics and stuff. So, and Fiction House, along with all the other kinds of things they were doing, jungle comics and space opera comics and Western comics, they had this horror series, the Ghost Galleries. There were, it had the other stuff we loved from Fiction House, the beautiful women, but it had, the Ghostbusters too,
I was going to say that I really appreciated Price's introduction. At times, at first I was wondering, like, why are we getting so much EC stuff? Why are we getting more about Fiction House? But he really does a good job of kind of putting them into this larger context. And what I really liked was like near the end of it, where he was kind of comparing Fiction House's comics to like the Poverty Row movie studios, and kind of like B movies, the kind of the B movies of the comics.
Yeah. It's a great introduction, and so we were thrilled to have him do that book for us, and we hope more people bring us great ideas like that.
And for our listeners who aren't familiar with Ghosts and Girls of Fiction House, the comics that make up this volume are the Ghost Gallery sections of the original Jumbo comics from the early 1940s. And one of the things I really enjoy about the Ghost Gallery sections, again, which is, I guess, the entire book here, is I guess the full title is The Ghost Gallery by Drew Murdoch. And so you were talking about hosts in EC Comics earlier. I mean, Drew Murdoch is not a host, but he is someone. He's kind of like a macabre detective, and then so these are the stories from his files. And I find that an interesting mashup of detective narrative and horror.
Mm. Yeah, no, Drew Murdoch was a great guy.
So now, your other new Chilling Archives of Horror Comics volume is introduced by the aforementioned Mike Howlett, which I guess is appropriate because, as he points out in his intro here, and this is the Complete Voodoo Volume 1, that there is a link between these Voodoo comics and what he did earlier with the Eerie publications.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the stories in Voodoo were later stolen by the people that were putting together Eerie publications and reworked and rehashed and gored up, for the later black and white creepy and Eerie knockoffs. And so there's definitely a tie to the Voodoo and the people that put Voodoo together, which is commonly referred to as the Iger Shop. And, they were all kind of drawing in this Matt Baker style, and Jack Kamen was there. And it was a real sweatshop type situation. You really can barely tell who might have drawn what in each panel to panel. But, it all has this house style, which, again, is kind of a Matt Baker meets Ghastly Graham Ingalls or something like that. So you got again, you have you have ghosts and ghouls and gals and girls. It's a great mashup of horror stories with pretty women. It's interesting. I can remember being at San Diego Comic Book one year and thinking, like, I've really been focusing on collecting funny animals and this and that, but I bet there'd be interesting stories in old horror comics. And I happened upon this one dealer who had boxes of these old non-EC horror comics, and a lot of them were from the Iger Shop. And so I go, this stuff will be fun. And I started looking at it, and I go, this stuff is dreadful. It's badly drawn. It has nothing to say for it. And I said, I'm not getting these. And these were like in these quarter boxes, so it wasn't even a price situation. But then later on, especially with doing all these collections for the Chilean Archives of Horror Comics, I started, I did start really amassing a lot of different horror comics. And I started, it grew to the point that the Iger Shop stuff was the stuff I loved the most. I found it the most fun. It was just wacky. I just think it just seemed like they were like brainstorming and having a good time together and just putting all kinds of wacky concepts into these stories. And they were all like, probably 5 guys working together on one page and having a great time doing it before they broke for their liquid lunch or something, and it just seemed like they were having a ball putting these comics together. And when you read them, you're having a ball with them, And I find the Iger Shop stuff, which I think Voodoo was maybe their best title. They did quite a bit of hard work, but Voodoo seemed to have some of the wackiest stories. I just find it such great fun, and you don't have to take it seriously. I mean, like EC is like classical music. I mean, those guys are obviously really, really great, but this is like punk rock. It's like
that's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, it's like sure you want to listen to sonata by Beethoven, but then sometimes you just want to listen to the Ramones.
The Iger Shop as the Ramones.
Yeah,
I like it. Yeah, I love the Voodoo book. It's and again because you say it's fun reading. A lot of it doesn't make a damn bit of sense.
Yeah,
but it's a lot of fun. One of my favorites was She Wanted to Know the Black Future, which is one of the last. I think it's the last story in the book, and I was drawn to it because part of it takes place in the library. The main character. Subject was to cost Lila her life because she had to go beyond academic bounds. She's doing research for a project, which I'm not quite sure what kind of project she needs this for. But I love read the dialogue from the first panel of page 2 of the story. Lila was with her boyfriend who's looking at her. And she's reading a book. He says, "Looks kind of silly to me, Lila." And she says, "No, Don, it isn't at all. The part that tells how you make a necklace from the feathers of a fresh-killed chicken, braided with weeds from a stagnant pool, and then wear it 3 days to find out your future, sounds as though it could really come true." That's just, I don't know how you write a sentence like that, but it's so amazing.
Yeah, no, I love the Voodoo stuff. I'm so proud of us publishing this trash.
And in good horror fashion, I mean, these stories keep coming back from the dead, so to speak. You've already mentioned that some of these stories from the Iger Shop, that appeared in Voodoo, were repurposed later on for Eerie Publications. And in fact, Mike points this out really well in his introduction. He even gives an example of the first page for Ghoul for a Day and how that was reworked. But you also point out, after Mike's intro, that some of these early Voodoo comic stories had appeared previously. And so what Farrell did was just to use them again. As you point out, in Voodoo number 1, there were, 1, 2, 3 stories that appeared earlier in other publications.
Right. No, they were cobbling these together. I mean, I think that's one of the things that gave the comic strength back then is that kids were buying them just like crazy. And so in a way, it didn't matter what was inside the comics. I mean, the kids wanted it colorful and exciting and lots of action and a little sexiness, but, it didn't matter the exact content or whether the stories made a hell of a lot of sense or, or if every panel wasn't, labored over to perfection. They just had to fill up these pages and print them and get them out to the distributors, and they would sell, not for very much money, only a dime, but a lot of dimes. And so I think that this gave the artists and writers a lot of freedom and the publishers, that we're giving them that because they just needed the pages filled. I don't need them good. I just need an 8-page story by Friday. So the artists could just like let themselves go, and they weren't all concerned about the stories making sense or the licensed characters were drawn in the precise manner that would reflect good on the brand or something like that. They were just like filling up these comics with craziness and fun and action and color and then on to the next story. So you get a lot. It's the Ramones. You're sitting there, and then and Joey and crew are batting out these great songs.
Yeah, you can even tell like the first story in the first issue, The Shelf of Skulls, looks like that one was drawn at the wrong perspective, and every page has been the art's been extended by like a half an inch either at the top or the bottom of the page. Like it's like, and they don't even try to hide it that well. It's like, well, let's just make it fit.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
It's like they had the New York Times philosophy. Everything,
Yeah, it fits. Just literally, we'll stretch it out.
Right.
Yeah, one of my favorites appears in issue number 3 of Voodoo, Plantation of Fear, because when I first opened up this book and started flipping through, I thought, what the hell is this? A screaming carrot? Because we have
the mandrake.
Yeah. We have these weird roots that have a life of their own, and
we used those guys in the end papers because I love those screaming vegetables.
Oh yeah, and in fact that story ends with a close-up of one of the screaming vegetables.
Yes, and if that was one of your favorite stories, you'll like the subsequent volumes because there's a lot more nutty stories like that ahead, where it's just surreal, it's just nonsense, it's just insanity now.
So there are 2 more volumes of the complete Voodoo that we can expect, right?
Yes.
And would they come out in 2016?
Oh, I think definitely the second one. Maybe the third one will come out the beginning of the following 2017 or something like that. I don't have the schedule right in front of me, but
okay.
There's definitely going to be another volume of Voodoo soon.
Because this is like candy, it doesn't have much nutritional value. It'll probably rot your teeth metaphorically, but I want more.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah, I want to read a whole book just by whoever wrote Idol of Death. About a sculptress who the public doesn't like her sculpture, so she has to find, as she puts it, native people who will appreciate the type of work which appeals only to those whose instincts are basic and whose minds are not crowded with false conceptions of art. And so she finds a native tribe and makes her art become their god. It's just, I don't know where it comes from, but it's freaking amazing.
No, I noticed you actually scanned that panel and put it on your Facebook page, Gene.
Oh, yeah.
I was reading your Facebook page. I'm one of your closest digital friends. I follow you regularly. I go, wow, this is a great panel. I wonder where this is from. And at the same time, my brain's saying, oh, you silly goose, it's from Voodoo. And when you say you would like to read a whole book, I think most of the Voodoo stories, I would say, large percentage was written by the writer, a woman, Ruth Rosh. So it's kind of wild that a woman would be writing these weird horror stories. But there it just shows you good horror and good comics fun that has no sexual boundaries.
Mm-hmm. Gene mentioned about this story, Idol of Death. He wished he knew the artist. And one of the things you do in your books is when you know who the artist was, you list them at the bottom of the first page. But I'm curious, and you talked about this before, but I'm going to ask you again nonetheless. What kind of labor goes into trying to figure out who the artist of some of these old obscure comics are?
Well, we actually, I used to think of myself as pretty good in this, and so I did a lot of the work on that. But then I realized I'm really an amateur sleuth, and so I've got 2 very close friends, Jim Van de Bacour Jr. and Tillman from a collector from Germany, and they're good friends with each other, and we send them pretty much every book we do now, and they vet them and make sure that we have the arts right. And it's detective work. They, they're like great detectives who could look at a fingerprint and know who the criminal was, and they can look at a comic panel and see how the guy or gal draws hands or hats or whatever, and go, oh well, that's so and so, and he was working with this company at this time because he just left this other company, and they know how to put all the pieces together. So I'm really indebted to these guys. They're good friends and a big help to us because. But it's still a lot of it. I mean, I think they would even admit themselves. A lot of it's still guesswork, because so many of the stories weren't signed for various reasons. I think the publishers didn't want the artists to have credit because if the artists were any good, somebody might steal them from their shop and over to their own shop, and also if the artist was getting good and his name was on the work, he might ask for more money, like thinking that maybe his name was helping to sell the comics, and so that's making the editor or the publisher the bad guy. I also think the artists themselves didn't want to sign this work. Maybe they quite weren't proud of it. And I know a cartoonist once told me that when he would go to a party, people would ask, well, what do you do? And he would say, well, I'm a commercial artist, and they're thinking, that's nice. He draws things to promote new dishwashers or something like that, line drawings of dishwashers or refrigerators. But because he didn't want to tell them that he worked for comics, because especially in the 50s when there was so much criticism from the government and from religious groups and from parent-teachers groups about comics, the cartoonists wanted to keep their names off of them, of the stories. So. And many of the cartoonists thought this was kind of the lowest rung on the art ladder, and then they aspired to climb the ladder and do slick magazine work or something like that. So they wanted to keep their name off the comics. So for these reasons, much of the work of the Golden Age wasn't signed. Even the comics that were signed didn't necessarily mean that the artist. I mean, Will Eisner his name was on many of the comics, but he was off. In the service, while Jules Pfeiffer and Lou Fine and Wally Wood and everybody were carrying on. So I mean, it's detective work, and we've got great detectives on the job, and we do feel it's really important to try to identify the artist and leave. Sometimes we put a name on the story, and then we put a question mark after it because we're not even quite sure, or we say it was penciled by so-and-so, but the inker is unknown, I mean, there's still so much that's not known, but we have the best guys in the business to help us try to figure out who did the work.
Yeah, I can understand how it can be hard to figure this out sometimes, especially because even sometimes people's styles change so much. Yeah. We just got the Horror by Heck. We just got the PDFs of that this morning. Haven't had time to read the whole book yet, but I did flip through it all. And by the end of the book, I can kind of see Don Heck in those pages, at least the Don Heck that I know of from Marvel Comics in the 60s. Mm-hmm. But the early part of the book, I don't recognize Don Heck there at all. I would, without his name there or his name on the cover, I would not have guessed. I'm looking at Satan, the page 140 in the book. It's the splash page of Satan's Love Call. With a woman in a very slinky yellow dress in the big splash panel, and I swear to God, that looks like Will Eisner inked by Alex Toth. I would never in a million years have guessed that was Don Heck, even with his name signed to the bottom of that drawing.
It should be Satan's Booty Call.
Don't ever answer that, Derek. If you get trust me, and I know Gene can tell you the same thing. Don't answer.
Don't answer Satan's Booty Call. That's a recipe for disaster. But yeah, no. I love the art. Just flipping through it, I haven't read the stories yet, but the art in a lot of places is just beautiful, and a lot of it, I just would never have guessed that this was Don Heck, which is why a book like this is important to have.
Well, he in a sense, well, you can say this about any comic artist's career, but in a sense, it wasn't totally Don Heck in that he was, I think, channeling a lot of Milton Caniff there.
Yeah, there's a lot of Caniff there also.
Yeah, and he might have been inspired by fellow guys doing work like Toth and people like that. But it certainly isn't a Don Heck that we know, because it's very dark. It's very like film noir. It's very there's more black ink than not in the panels, and that it's very moody and dark and foreboding. And
I cannot wait to read this book. It just looks beautiful.
Work. Yeah, I mean, anyone that knows the history of Heck knows that he kind of got a bad rap because there were some vocal critics that weren't didn't hold his superhero work in high regard, and so he got really dismissed as an artist. I can't say that these days I'm an expert or qualified to speak to his superhero work, though I thought some of it was pretty good and a lot of fun when I was reading it as a kid. But this horror work, I mean, I would hold it up to any artist's horror work. It's really incredibly dark and gruesome and gritty. I mean, there's a lot of guys getting shot in the head. In fact, we used a famous cover to make our own cover this time, where there's a guy in obviously understandably a total state of shock because he's just been shot in the forehead, and so we put that on the cover, and much to my shame, we make this a kind of a special cover, and we've die cut the bullet hole out of his forehead.
Oh, wow!
for the book. So I'm anti gun violence and everything like that. And so I'm hoping this will help that cause rather than hurt it. But he was this work was very dark. I'm surprised a lot of it wasn't reproduced in Frederick Wortham's Seduction of the Innocent book, because it's pretty gruesome.
Now, in your brief essay in the Horror by Heck volume, I mean, you do give a little background of Heck's career. You even point out about this penchant for bullet holes in foreheads at one point. But to me, what really stood out, and you mentioned this as well, but it's Kelly Jones's introduction, and he comes out and in just about 2 or 3 pages, just lays it out like it is. He says, "Hey, I'm glad that this is out here like this because there needs to be some justice for Heck." And he points out that infamous Comics Journal piece on Gary Groth that basically many I guess that framed Heck as a hack.
Yeah.
And so this is both Jones and you do as well in the setup to this volume, saying that he is no hack, and here is proof.
Yeah, and I mean, he was a great stylist, and he could draw sexy women, and unbeknownst to us all till we got familiar with this material, he was a horror master, and he was a great artist. I don't have any qualifications about that. I think he was one of our great comic book artists. Certainly, this material itself is and it's interesting. This is I mean, maybe part of it was youthful enthusiasm, because this was some of his earliest work on his own, and so I think he was like maybe really pouring his heart and soul into it, and making it strong, and so you can look at careers of cartoonists and fine artists too. I'm sure, and they do mature, they get better, they get more skilled, and they're better, say, anatomy or color or whatever they're bringing to their work. So they get better and better as they get older. But there's something about the work they did, at the beginnings of their career, that the youth and enthusiasm, and excitement that they put into it, and it may not be quite as well crafted or put together as their more mature work, but there's something that you can never replace that the young blood flowing through the veins when you're doing great artwork. Though I don't mean to say again that this work is not like in any way poorly drawn or the anatomy is not weak or anything like that. This is strong, well crafted material, and then on top of that, the style and the verve and the darkness and the grittiness and the shadows make it a great horror work.
And you're going to have a fun time with this volume. With the very first story collected here that appeared in issue number 1 of Weird Terror, and that's Hitler's Head.
Yeah. Again, I mean, you can't discount the wackiness of the writers who were putting together these stories, and how they were having fun and kind of doing nutty things, But
well, where did the idea for a volume on Heck come from?
Well, I think that idea was from Craig Yoe. For good or for bad, I'll take credit on this one. I mean, I had seen this work, and I'm thinking this is amazing, and we should be showing this man's work, so that he gets the credit he deserves for it, and and it's all his horror work for comic media. And, so it makes for a nice package. I think it makes for a terrific Yoe book. It's the perfect Yoe book. It's kind of a, quote, unknown artist, yet there's a hook. He was, he created Iron Man and was, one of the framers of the Marvel universe. And, so there's a hook to it, and it's great work, and it's unknown work, and it all fits together, not nicely between two covers, so it's kind of the perfect Yoe book.
Yeah. And you do this with a lot of the earlier Chilling Archives of Horror volumes, because you have books on Dick Briefer, Bob Powell, Jack Cole, Howard Nostran, and Tom Sutton. So, number 13 in the series, appropriately enough, is Don Heck. So who else in the future might we expect to see showcased in the Chilling Archives of Horror series?
Well, it's little known that Charles Schultz did a lot of horror comics in the 50s, and I mean, did you know that?
You're not joking. This is...
So we'll be putting together a collection of Charles Schultz horror comics. Now that's going to be a rather thin book of... Well, it's really only 1 or 2 pages of an introduction. Let's see, who do we have coming up? We bounce back between kind of monographs on artists, like you said, Jack Cole, Howard Nostran, Don Heck, and collecting an artist's work, and then we're collecting the work of a title through Voodoo, and then we also do subjects. So a couple, one subject that's imminent is The Devil Will Get His Due. We're doing a book of devil stories, and just like Mike Howlett has edited a great book for us, and Michael Price, this one's edited by one of our 3 horror hosts, Mr. Carswell, who in reality is Steve Baines. Steve runs the popular Horrors of It All blog, which reprints old horror comics, and he's been a great friend and part of the horror comics collections that we do. He's got his hand in most nearly every one of them. He helps in at least some way, but this is going to be totally his book. He's edited this book. He's chosen the stories, and they've come from his collection. He's got a big collection of horror comics, and it's just a lot of fun. I mean, except for Frankenstein, I guess a lot of our volumes haven't been character oriented, because horror stories are usually not about a continuing character. But Frankenstein was done by Dick Briefer, and it was his own character. But The Devil has stories about him have been done by every publisher, every artist, every writer. So Steve pulled together stories from all the different publishers and artists and writers, and it's really a lot of fun. I mean, the stories are pretty wacky, and what's interesting about stories like this, like when we've done our volumes on zombies, you think like, well, they're all going to be the same, but because these writers are always kind of trying to do something novel and new and different and kind of amuse themselves, I think that there's always a new angle, like, oh, okay, there was a story, we've had stories about Hitler, but how about a story about just Hitler's head? So the devil stories, there's all kinds of different angles. The devil is sometimes a woman, and this devil is walking the streets, and he's in the pits of hell, and so there's different places, people, and things, and so there's a real variety to the stories, and they're a lot of fun. And the devil does get his due. He's a bad guy. We're not saying the devil's a good guy. He's shown in these stories time and time again. You don't want to answer the devil's booty call.
So now that's coming out in the spring.
It's a book of stern warning, and I think that when's the Devil's Tales book coming out? She shrugs her shoulders. We're not quite sure. I think in about a month it's going to come out sometime, maybe the first month of the new year. Good way to start the new year, getting in bed with the devil.
Yeah. Now another upcoming project I want to discuss with you is Haunted Love.
Yes.
Because you have the haunted horror and you have weird love. So what's the next logical step? Haunted Love.
Yeah, well, just like the term in Hollywood of high concept, taking two genres and mashing them together into one new kind of story for a movie. We thought like, hey, we're having a lot of fun. The fans seem to be having a lot of fun with haunted horror. We're having a lot of fun, and the fans seem to be having a lot of fun with weird love. What if we combine the two? What if we had horror mixed with love?
Two tastes that go great together.
Yeah, right. So it's the unholy love child of those two comic series, and it's going to be a 3-issue miniseries, and filled with great material. We actually start off with an Iger story that is like one of the weirdest Iger stories you'll ever see, and your jaw will drop, and you won't be able to get it back up until the story's over, and maybe quite a bit of time after. Horror was a part of. Love was a part of a lot of horror stories. We're not drawing. For the Weird Love series, we actually take stories from old funky romance comic books, and obviously for the horror comics in Haunted Horror, we're drawing from horror comics. Horror Love is drawn from the horror comics, so there are horror comics that were published that had a love. Particular stories would have a love angle to them, and that really wasn't so uncommon. A lot of stories did have some kind of story about the relationship between a man and a woman, and their love relationship, usually gone horribly wrong. So we were able to find really, really great stories. It's all killer, no filler, and when I say killer, a lot of dates don't end so well.
But no, so why the decision to make this a 3-issue miniseries?
Well, I guess it's a way to test it out. Well, we're capitalists. Well, at least I'm a capitalist. I guess Clee's from Italy, so she's probably some kind of socialist commie or something. But if it's successful, and we wouldn't be opposed to doing more. So I guess it's a way to try it out, see if it works. Will the love fans like the horror? Will the horror fans like the love? We get a lot of crossover anyway. I think a lot of our readers for Weird Love are horror comic fans. They recognize that these stories are fun and funky, and that they're by the same artists and writers who were doing the horror stories. and that we have a real bent to these stories, and that they are weird love. I mean, we've chosen the weirdest and craziest and wacky angled stories that could be found in the old romance stories. A lot of which were pedestrians, but we found the really crazy, insane stories. So a lot of horror fans do appreciate our Weird Love series, and I think maybe not every fan of Weird Love is a horror comics fan. They do, there are people that read it just because they like the love angle. They like the, kinky, weird, wacky love angle to it, but they like the love and the stories about relationships and things that those stories entail. But will there be enough fans of both horror and love to support Haunted Love? We think so, but we're testing the waters. It's like dating.
That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, we're up for a date, and we'll see where this relationship where it goes.
Well, I really
we're committed to 3 dates, but I don't know if we're committed to it. And obviously, you don't commit with 3 dates. I mean, I fell in love with Cleetia the instant I saw her, but that's unusual. Usually, you have dates and engagement, and it's a while before you get to the altar. So we're gonna have 3 dates, see where it goes.
I'll be with you on those 3 dates. I love Weird Love.
Well, now it's getting kinkier. Gene's gonna.
I know.
Dates.
But and just I'm not sure how often Weird Love's been talked about on this podcast, but just here's some of the great titles.
Quite a bit.
Well, I mean, Too Fat to Frug, Love of a Lunatic, to Frug, Love of a Lunatic, I Was Too Beautiful, Love, Honor, and Swing Baby. These are all. I love romance comics in general. When I was a kid, that was like the last thing I wanted to read in the world. But now I think they're just messed up in all. Even a normal one is messed up in all kinds of ways. But these are messed up in messed up ways, and they are just so much fun to read.
Between you and me, I would be thrilled if I was not working on nothing but Weird Love. I mean, I just find it so much fun to work on, and the stories are so entertaining. I mean, that's where I originally, as a kid, came to comics, to be entertained. And these stories are so entertaining. They're such a ball to read. And I just love working on Weird Love. And there's another aspect about Weird Love. All the other genres have been, the historians have really dug into them. And we know a lot of the artists and writers and the publishers and what's in each and every issue. But the romance comic books are, the last untapped genre in comics. There's really not much known about them. I mean, there's been some historians like Michelle Nolan that have been doing some good work, but as far as really knowing what's in each and every issue and what was happening and everything, it's still uncharted territory. So it's really fun to for me to go to a convention and pop open a plastic bag and pull out the comic and discover some story I wouldn't have known was in there and would never have believed would be in there, because it's supposed to be a nice romance comic book. Instead, there's this insane story. So the joy of discovery and turning on my friends to the different stories, and your reaction, Gene, and other people like you, has just made the Weird Love comic a lot of fun to work on.
So we can expect the Weird Love and haunted horror titles to continue.
I think so. We could use some more fans. So I am thrilled to talk about those titles on Comics Alternative. So we could use more fans, more support, more comic shops prominently displaying them, the whole bit. But we're in for a committed relationship.
In a weird way.
In a weird way.
Because I do appreciate the fact that Well, I do appreciate the fact that not only do we get these really nice hardbound volumes from you guys at Yoe Books, but that we have those bi-monthly serials as well. So the introduction of Haunted Love, albeit for now a limited series, was great news when I saw it solicited. So
now, I once heard that the egg was the perfect package, the perfect food package or something. It's like. Yeah, it is really quite a remarkable thing, an egg.
The incredible edible egg.
Yeah, the incredible edible egg. That's it. But I think of the old-fashioned, gosh, I hate this term, floppy comic, but that's what people know it as now. The old school comic book. It was like the perfect package. It was relatively inexpensive, so a kid with that's just on an allowance or earning money. Collecting soda bottles and turning them in, could afford a comic book, and it was all in color for a dime, as one book titled "A History of Comics," and then there was just these great stories, these artists and writers working together, and these fun, entertaining concepts, and you could sit down and read it and not too, it wasn't like undertaking a War and Peace or something. You could sit down and enjoy it, and laying in your bunk at summer camp or in the back seat of the car as your parents were driving to grandma and grandpa's or whatever. It was very it was portable and easy to read because you have the integration of words and pictures so you can understand it, and I just think the old comic. I love doing the hardbacks where we can take ourselves a little more seriously, like the Walt Kelly book, and do an impressive package with gold foil and stuff like that. But there's also just something about a good old down and dirty, funky comic book format that really works for me. So we really do like Haunted Horror and Weird Love, and now Haunted Love, and we have some other comic books in mind if we had the time to put them together. I think we have some really great. Comic book concepts. In fact, every once in a while I look at the file of those sitting here, and I think oh man, Derek and Gene are going to love this one if we can ever launch this particular title. So,
well, hey, if you need our help, just let us know.
Well, we can always use help. Anybody that wants to help scan and clean up stories and write some copy and proofread, we're always looking for volunteers. So. If you're serious about it, let me know, or if any of your readers want to help produce Yoe Books and Yoe Comics, we're always on the lookout for much needed help.
Just say yo to Yoe.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. Now, metaphorically, we're standing at the cusp of 2016. So you've told us about some of the stuff we can look forward to from Yoe Books. What else in 2016 might we expect?
One that I want to mention, Mike Howlett, who is such a good friend. He and his wife Andrea were with me at a convention up in Albany, New York, and we're sitting behind our adjacent tables, and this guy came up and introduced himself, and he was a horror comics fan, and he's the I don't know remember his exact title, but basically he's the head snake guy at the Museum of Natural History in New York City. So I said, we should do a book of snake stories, because I was kind of thinking that there's probably enough snake stories, and so I was telling him and Mike that, and incidentally, Mike and Andrea were with me at the convention, and they would go after we would put the cloth over our table and go back to the hotel at night. They would sneak out at night and then again in the morning to go snake hunting. They're big into snakes and finding snakes and photographing them. They and this friend Frank, new friend Frank from the museum, they're really into snakes. That probably even more than comics, or maybe almost as much. And so it was the perfect team. Frank Burbank is going to write the introduction, give us a little class. Is this head honcho at the museum, and Mike's going to edit the book, and we kind of assembled a little group on Facebook an artist. Brian and Steve Baines is there to help us, and then me and Mike and Frank and Cleats here. We kind of have the secret Facebook group, and we kind of keep sharing with each other discoveries about stories we're finding that feature snakes. And again, there's all kinds of different wacky, weird stories about snakes from all kinds of different angles. Whether it's crazed religious guys with snakes that terrorize a town with their snake handling, or snakes coming out of graves, and Frank and Mike will debunk a lot of the myths that comic book stories perpetuate about snakes, and I think they're going to probably make a good point that by and large, most every snake is our friend, and they're helping the environment, and they're not to be feared. But I think there are exceptions. Maybe certain cobras, and without exception in comic book stories of the 1950s, snakes are not someone you want to meet up with. So there's great stories, and there's I think one of our fans, Sigmund Freud, will really enjoy the stories too, because a lot of them involve snakes and pretty girls skillfully drawn by the comic book artists of the times. That would cause our friend Sigmund to pause a bit as he read these stories and saw the imagery.
And that's going to come out later in 2016?
Yeah. Yes. We're nodding authoritatively.
Okay.
That's a whole year. Stephen says the 7th month of 20. What's the 7th month, please? Yeah, July. Yeah, you'll be able to go snake hunting in July.
Wow, that's cool. So are you going to be back at Heroes Con in June?
Yes. I love Shelton, Drum, and Heroes Con, and I just fell in love with that. I had always heard that I would love that convention, and Shelton kindly had me as a guest this last year, and he and I both enjoyed the experience immensely, and he's told me that I'm now a permanent fixture of the Heroes Con.
Well,
and the reason I love that convention, besides Shelton and his warm and welcoming and enthusiastic staff, is because it's a very comics oriented convention, and it is the best convention I've found for adding to my collection of old comic books, because there are a lot of dealers with old comic books there. Sure, there's some great cosplay and everything else that you think about with a modern convention, but it hasn't strayed too far from its roots of people that like old comic books, and so I had a grand time. It was great seeing you there, and maybe we can get Gene to come down this year too.
Yeah, we'd have to convince Gene.
I've been hearing good things about HeroesCon for a long time. I've just never been able to make it.
Gene, and then it's all true. It turned out to be true.
Yeah. And this year, my daughter Zoe fell in love with Craig, and she wanted me to tell you hello. I told her I was going to be interviewing you today. And, and in fact, Craig, your name came up over Christmas holiday because we were up at my mother-in-law's, and the kids were watching. And my son's in college and stuff, but he still loves the Muppets. But we were watching the first Muppet movie, and I mentioned something about. I said, "Yeah, you remember Craig from Heroes Con? He worked with the Muppets," and so that raised you even higher in her esteem. But she was at Heroes Con, and I hope that she's able to accompany me back in 2016.
Oh, that would be great. We'll share a pizza again, and I met Zoe and a lot of great people down there. I mean, I don't know if it's the friendly South or whatever, but I made some great new friends down there, and from Shelton and everybody else, and so I'm really looking forward to being a permanent fixture and coming back this year, and it'll be a good time. And maybe some of your listeners can come down there, and we'll have a little. We'll go to that pizza parlor again, and you and Zoe can treat us to me and all your listeners, and Gene and Shelton and his whole staff to a nice meal.
Yeah, well, Charlotte is my hometown, so I guess I have some responsibilities.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. But, if history is any indication, I am sure that we'll have you back on the show before Heroes Con. Craig, I've said it before, to call you a friend of the Comics Alternative is an understatement. You've been on the show more than anyone, and that number is just going to increase, the number of your appearances here.
Well, it's nice that I have this friendship to count on, and it's always fun talking with you guys, rapping with you guys, and we appreciate your support and enthusiasm for our humble little efforts.
Yeah, I think you're becoming a de facto co-host now of the Comics Alternative.
You have an honorary PhD at this point.
Yes.
Oh, that'd be great.
Yeah,
the Comics Yoe Alternative.
Yeah, there you go. And Heroes Con will hood you.
Why are you saying honorary? I don't know if you know that, but I actually am a PhD.
Seriously?
Well, I'm a post-hole digger from
way back.
Oxford, Kansas. I'm a post-hole digger from Kansas.
Yeah, so you're a doctor of hijinks.
There you go.
Yeah. Well, Craig, good luck with these new books and then the future projects for 2016. And it's good, again, to have you on as the very first show of the new year. And
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, everybody.
All right. Take care.
Take care, Craig. Thanks
Everybody
a lot.
Resolve to buy lots of Yoe Books this year.
That's right.
So we say it once more to be sure that Yoe Books are the finest you can purchase. The reason they're good is no mystery. It's that Yoe Books are making comics history.
Well, that was a lot of fun. I think we're going to talk to each other a lot longer again on that one. Even though we spent a lot of time on this one, there was still a lot more we could have talked about. There were a lot of stories that I could have just talked about for a long time, just the crazy artwork or the crazy writing or just lots of fun.
Exactly. And, there's a lot to talk about. Often when we have Craig on the show, he has 2, maybe 3 books that have just recently come out. But, arguably, there are 4, even 5 that we could have discussed. There's the Walt Kelly fairy tales, Ghost and Girls, A Fiction House, The Complete Voodoo, Volume 1, and then the Haunted Horror 3rd volume. But you and I talked about that on Halloween. But then, as he reminded me, there is the most recent Weird Love volume. This guy's all over the place.
Yeah, and Weird Love. One more plug for Weird Love. I love that series. I actually get the floppies. I don't have the hardcovers. I hope there's not extra stuff in the hardcovers because I'm addicted to the floppy experience with that one. Yeah, I love reading that every other month.
Yeah, well, I get the floppies and the hardcovers. I just love that stuff. Same with Haunted Horror. So, again, we want to thank Craig for being on the show. And if you want to find copies of his books, the recent ones as well as the older ones, then head on over to Discount Comic Book Service or their sister company, In Stock Trades. So whether you get your comics through dcbservice.com or instocktrades.com, you're going to find great discounts that beat every other retailer, online or otherwise. And, as you're waiting for those comics to come in, well, brew yourself a cup of coffee, and you can't find better coffee than at Just Coffee Co-op. Remember, go to their website, justcoffee.coop, and when you check out, use the coupon code COMICS for 10% off, plus shipping is free. And after you've, read your comics and sipped your coffee, then get in touch with us and let us know what you think about our interview with Craig. If you go to our website, comicsalternative.com, you'll see that you can send us a voice message through the wonders of SpeakPipe. Or you can call us the old-fashioned way. The phone number is 415-3-COMICS. That's 415-326-6427. You can also email us. We're 2 guys at comicsalternative.com. Email me directly at derek@comicsalternative.com. And Gene, how can they contact you?
Oddly enough, Gene at comicsalternative.com will get you there.
Neat, huh? You can also find us on Twitter. We're at the number 2 guys with PhDs, but we're also on Facebook, on Tumblr, on Instagram, on Google+, on Pinterest, and on YouTube. You can subscribe to the podcast through iTunes. You can stream us on Stitcher. You can also find us on TuneIn. And as always, you can find every single one of our episodes, as well as the reviews and the comics-related commentary that we post on our blog. And that's at the website, comicsalternative.com.
We are all up in your internets.
That's right. And Gene, you and I are going to be talking more in the coming months, other interviews and shows. So I look forward to those.
Yeah, it should be a lot of fun.
Until then, I'm Derek.
And I'm Gene.
We'll see you later.
Take care.
And have a happy new year.
From Yoe Books, and we look for the upcoming titles. They don't cost a whole lot of dough. That's why we say yippee-yi-yo. You too can buy all the Yoe Books. Be a fan, and there's one way to show it. Just say it out loud and be heard. And be certain to yippee-yi-yo it. Yoe Books does the best books around. They do humor and romance and horror. Whatever your passion may be, Yoe Books can do it, yes sir. So we say it once more to be sure that Yoe Books are the finest you can purchase. The reason they're good is no mystery, is that Yoe Books are making comics history.